No administration has accomplished more in the first 90 days. That includes on military, on the border, on trade, on regulation, on law enforcement. We love our law enforcement, and on government reform. We're also working with Congress on tax reform and simplification, and we're on time if we get that health care approval. So press every one of you congressmen, press everybody, because we want to get that approval. And it just makes the tax reform easier, and it makes it better, and it's going to make it steeper. It's going to be bigger, and that's what we want to do. So we're in very good shape on tax reform. We have the concept of the plan. We're going to be announcing it very soon. But health care, we have to get the health care taken care of. And as soon as health care takes care of, we are going to march very quickly. You're going to watch. We're going to surprise you. Right, Steve Mnuchin? Right?
Joining us now on set in Washington, columnist for The Washington Post, George Will, and with us from the White House, NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker. Kristen, we'll start with you. President Trump once again turning his attention to health care yesterday. What are you hearing?
Well, I was with him in Wisconsin when he made those comments, Mika. Here's what I can tell you based on my conversations with top officials here at the White House. There is a real push to try to revive health care reform. The reasons are political and practical. Politically speaking, it would give him more momentum trying to get something big done on tax reform. And then obviously the practical side of this, we've been talking about this throughout the week. He needs to repeal and replace Obamacare in order to get some of those big tax breaks actually passed as a part of a broader tax reform package. They were sort of relying on that math. Without that math, tax reform becomes a whole lot more difficult. So what is actually going on behind the scenes? Well, I can tell you that top advisor Steve Bannon, the vice president, have been working the phones. One top advisor saying they had hoped to maybe have something done as early as this week. When you ask who they're working with, what's the coalition they're looking toward, they're still trying to work with the Freedom Caucus. You'll recall that's the same caucus that sank their chances for health care reform the first time around, and moderate Republicans. There's still not a real effort to reach out to Democrats on this. So that's the sense behind the scenes. In terms of whether this is actually going to get done this week, it doesn't look like that's a real possibility. And also, it's worth noting that this White House has been getting a lot of criticism, the president getting criticism for changing his tone on a lot of his campaign promises. So yesterday's comments really came as a part of a broader kind of return to his populist message, talking about creating jobs, repealing and replacing Obamacare, and getting something big done on tax reform. But that remains a real question mark and a real roadblock to getting something done, or I should say on health care. That remains a roadblock to getting something done on tax reform. Mika, Joe.
NBC's Kristen Welker, thank you very much. So, George Will, if you are in Congress, you're a member of the Freedom Caucus, you're dealing with some of those town halls, and you get a call from Steve Bannon, potentially about health care. Are you lurching to the phone and desperately hoping for Steve Bannon's attention and then hanging on every word and saying, yes, absolutely, I'm in?
Steve Bannon summoned the Freedom Caucus to the White House campus and told them that there was no choice here, that they had no choice. But grown-ups don't like to be told that. If I were in Congress, I would be a member of the Freedom Caucus, and I would say, no, I'm elected here to exercise my own judgment. These are splittable differences. The Freedom Caucus helped sink the Ryan bill, but hardly did it alone. The decisive blow came when Rodney Frelinghuysen, from a New Jersey political family that's been in American politics since the Continental Congress, came out against it. Now, he's not chopped liver. He is not a backbencher. He's chairman of the Appropriations Committee. So there was defects from right and from the left for a bill that, by one poll, Quinnipiac, had the support of 17% of Americans.
George, wait, have you ever seen a political party dominate all levers of power in Washington so much and be so ineffective at the same time, passing any legislation?
The problem is they started with something that is, as the president said, who knew health care was so complicated? Well, the answer is anyone who paid any attention to the debates for the last 7 or 8 years. They'd be better off in some ways if you had divided government, because then you have to deal with the other side. And when you have a narrow majority, which the Republican majority in the House really is, you've empowered a faction. And the House Freedom Caucus knows how to use that power.
But don't you have the chance to deal with the other side, even if you don't have divided government, if you have a narrow faction that's blocking you? I mean, do you think it's possible to try to carve out some Democrats for a health care reform bill?
No. By now, repealing, replacing Obamacare means stand up to repudiate the last administration. Okay. And it's asking a lot to ask Democrats to do that.
So how does this get resolved, Gene? You have Democrats that are going to fight to the end to save Obamacare. Yeah. You've got Republicans who really don't have any option. They have been promising their voters for 7 years that they were going to repeal Obamacare. That's why they picked up most of those 62 seats in the House, why they picked up a dozen or so in the Senate, a dozen or so governorships, 1,000 state legislative seats. It's hard to walk away from that promise.
Hard to walk away from that promise. The only way this works out is if Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer work out a deal. I mean, I don't see any other way of doing it, and it starts over there, and then some fait accompli is presented to the House, and the president gets behind it, and maybe something happens. I think that's unlikely. That doesn't seem to be the way they're going to play this. They're going to try again in the House. I don't see it happening.
Okay.
And Sam Stein, as you brought up earlier, just as George Will said, Steve Bannon threatened the Freedom Caucus, Donald Trump threatened Democrats, saying, I'm going to basically gut this bill without you if you don't support it.
Yeah, it's just sort of been bizarre from a negotiation standpoint, because he threatened the Freedom Caucus, then went to work with them, threatened Democrats, then said, well, maybe I'll craft a health care bill with them, then threatened them all over again. And it just strikes me, maybe I'm naive, but it just strikes me that if you want to work with people, you don't spend your time on Twitter mocking them and calling them stupid. You try to actually pick up the phone, bring them to the White House, sit down, go over common ground, talk about exchanges of ideas. But this White House doesn't seem capable of doing that. And I'm not sure exactly when they're going to break out of this idea that they can just mock people and badger them into submission. It just doesn't work that way.
George Will, have you seen any evidence that this president is learning on the job how to deal with Congress? Any evidence at all?
No, that's the learning curve.
There is no learning
flat as
curve.
Nebraska. The problem is that 3 elements of Obamacare turn out to be extremely popular. Yeah. One, which isn't that important, is keeping your children on your family plan until they're age 26. The second is the ban on denying insurance to people with pre-existing conditions.
Right.
Once you commit to that, all kinds of things follow from that. But most important, what we've really learned in this debate is that the expansion of Medicaid is the essence of Obamacare. And whether or not people favored it when it happened, by now all kinds of states have what the courts call reliance interests. They built this into their budgets, and people have changed their behavior. It's really hard to unwind.
Is it right that they have to start with Obamacare repeal? I mean, they said it, then they said, okay, now we'll move on. Now they're saying they have to go back. Why do they have to do health care first?
Well, they have to do health care first, A, because they said they would. The president said he would repeal it on day 1 and replace it by something fabulous. Details to follow. Second, they have to do it because it is tangled up with tax reform, which the president really cares about and ought to care about more. It's tangled up because some of the taxes, and there are a great many of them in Obamacare, are related to what you can do to be budget neutral in reforming taxes. So you can't move until you move the immovable here.
And George bringing up the point about Medicaid is it is really the intractable issue, not only as far as Obamacare goes, but politically, because the Freedom Caucus is not going to support an expansion of Medicaid. They're not going to support that part of the bill. But in the Senate, good luck getting the Republican Senate to support anything that guts the Medicaid portion of this bill. It's just not going to happen.
George Will, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. Good to have you back on. Coming up.
Oh, by the way, you went to opening day.
Oh.
Again.
Did you love it?
For the Nationals?
Of course.
Life begins on opening day.
Yes, it does.
Is this the year for our Nationals? Is this the year, George?
They will get to October, and October is a crapshoot.
Okay.
There you go.
Honest answer.
We can sleep till October.
Coming up on...
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.